Welcome into another episode of Friends from Work, a podcast about all things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's a podcast that is hosted always by me, Kyle Sconowell, and my longtime friend from work, Robert Earl. We call him Robbie. Here's the thing. We don't get very many of these anymore, and there's just something fun about the buzz that's in the air when a Marvel movie is released, and I'm never going to take that for granted. I'm never going to. Look, it's a 2 water bottle day. I'm prepared to talk to you. If you're just finding this podcast, we release episodes weekly covering all things in the MCU and sometimes a few things outside the MCU, a la Spider-Man 2, which I'm getting really close to finishing. But if you're also just finding this podcast, you are jumping in at the point of what we like to call a mega week. It's a mega week because Loki finale is this week. The Marvels premieres this week. I'm finishing my Spider-Man 2 playthrough. We made a screen recap for the Marvels on YouTube, and we have a ton of stuff going on Friends from Work Plus as well. So literally stuff from Robbie and I every single day this week, which is why it's a mega week. But man, if you couldn't tell, Robbie, I'm super excited to be here. Let me ask you how you're doing before I dive into the movie.
Man, I just have one question, I guess. Okay. You and I talked briefly before we started, and as always, we did not really talk about the movie because that's sacred. You know, that's happening here.
We literally haven't said anything to each other.
But what we did talk about is where we saw the movie, which we'll talk about more later in the episode. But I was just thinking, one of the fun things about the screening is we got a little concessions voucher.
Yes.
And one, thank you, Daddy Disney. But two...
Don't ever call it that again,
please. Two, why do we call them concessions?
Yeah, you're not giving anything up, right? You're getting something.
We're getting something.
They're making a concession.
Are they conceding? They're like, all right, fine. We'll give you these snacks. We recognize that we owe you these snacks.
Did you just get a drink or did you get some popcorn too?
Just a drink. I only got a drink. Yeah, I was only granted a drink.
I went to a Paw Patrol screener with my 3-year-old daughter, and we got posters, popcorn for each of us, drink for each of us, took a picture in this photo booth. Like, Disney, come on now. It's time to step up the game a little bit.
Who makes Paw Patrol? Should they be my new dad?
Yeah, stop saying that. It's bothering me. Holy cow. So I like to reiterate this every time we have a film initial reactions type episode, just because, again, if you don't know this podcast, I need to clarify a few things. One, you and I have not talked about any reaction to this film so far. We watched it this time in separate locations. Sometimes we're together. Sometimes we're in LA. Sometimes we're in Texas. One time or twice we were in Atlanta. But this time we were separate, so we haven't talked at all. The second thing is, it's always so weird on these initial reactions episodes when you walk out of the theater and no one else has posted anything yet. So the social media embargo still hasn't lifted. So I don't know. There was maybe only 10 people in my entire IMAX theater. I don't know what the buzz is. So what you're about to get is my actual genuine reaction. This is not influenced by you or by anyone else in the theater or anything online. And that always makes for a really weird experience because I'm about to give you some takes that I have no idea. I might be in the crazy minority here.
Right.
So that's my disclaimer. Here we go. You ready?
I'm ready.
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And here's the thing. I'm not even gonna look at you yet. I'm not gonna look at you yet. Was it perfect? No. Was there a couple goofy things? Yes. Were Kamala's parents maybe in the movie too much? Maybe. But it's just so funny to me. It's so funny to me that we're having this dialogue online. Not you and I, by the way, but so many people are having this dialogue about how the MCU's in shambles and what are they going to do? And it's ruining cinema. And it's like, dude, if you just get rid of all that BS, it's just so fun to go to the theater, to sit in an IMAX theater and just have a good time watching a fun movie. Does it reinvent the wheel? No. Is it like the greatest film ever made? No. like if you already have your mind made up that you have superhero fatigue, I'm not even sure that this fixes it for you, but I really enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. So I just would say right off the bat, well, I guess if you're listening to this, you've already seen it, but I would just beg you to just start ignoring all that noise. Just ignore all the noise. Don't try to get things spoiled. Don't look stuff up ahead of time. Don't go in with expectations of this has got to reinvent the multiverse. And let's just have fun at the theaters, and you will have more fun with these movies. So for me, Robbie, I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Man, so
let's go.
I had a great time. And like there were, but before I forget, just because you said that the way you did, it's funny. It's been such a long year for, I mean, probably for everyone in various ways, but I just feel like a lot has happened within our world this year, and certainly within my world medically this year, between the first movie that we saw and the second or the third. But, you know, we started this year off with our Quantumania episode, and in LA, and we had this conversation at that point about how we felt this kind of growing, like at that point, it wasn't even necessarily negativity. It was just like a hyper focus on like the performance of the MCU and the perception of the MCU and like everything except like, is this a story that you're enjoying?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And at that point, it became this kind of ongoing, I think, conversation between us that in parts has been on the podcast and in parts hasn't. But I think what you're saying is such kind of perfect as we're closing out this year, starting to close out this year. We have the Loki finale episode coming up in a few days.
Maybe you're listening to this. It's maybe airing right now.
Yeah, true.
Potentially. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, which I think promises to be spectacular in its own right. But I like coming back to that because, yeah, like it's been such a crazy year, like or era, like couple years for the MCU in terms of just the amount of stuff that's come out. We've talked about that in various ways, and we don't need to retread all that. But I'm just so thoroughly on the same page where whenever I walked in today, I think what made me so happy is even more so than like Guardians, like I just had no idea what was going to happen. Like all I knew is it was a new chapter in the MCU, and it felt to me like I was going in like I used to, like we always did, where it's just like what's going to happen, like what characters might be introduced, but more importantly, since that, as people forget, was not always like the primary feature of MCU movies. Right. Like just what's going to happen with like the characters that we followed and that we're invested in. And this movie has several characters that you and I have been like publicly very invested in over the last couple of years of the podcast. And so I went in having just zero expectations, and it made it so fun for me that it's hard for me to really understand what it will be like for people to go in like not with that mindset.
Yep. You said this so well last week. We have shifted our minds. We're hoping everyone can collectively shift their mindset from treating these things as a vehicle to get from point A to point B. Like, okay, box checked. We heard about Carol. Check. No, let's just go back to it's an entertainment. It's art. Like we can just watch it and talk about it and have fun and not have to talk about all the peripherals around it. So anyways, I think if we talk too much about that, then we're joining that conversation. Around it. Yeah, and I don't want to. Yeah. But I'm so glad to hear that. I was thinking about you, while we're watching it, because I'm thinking he's probably at the exact same spot I am. Although I found out you were actually 20 minutes delayed from me. But man,
when I got a text from you about the post-credit scene, I was like, I don't even know what question this would be in reference to. It wasn't even a spoiler because I didn't even know what the subject matter was. But now we can talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. These episodes are always a little sporadic because I actually didn't take any notes this time. Normally I have some notes. If it was Loki, I'd have notes at my house. I just wanted to go in totally undistracted. And so my brain is just racing right now. Before we dive into some of the questions and the big plot things, I just need to comment on a couple things that I thought were so fun real quick. First of all, I thought, you know what I'm going to say here, the imagination on the visual side of it, I really enjoyed. It very much is following that kind of Guardians of the Galaxy vibe where it's like, if this universe is as big and galactic as we're always told it is, then I need people to have imagination of what different planets look like, what they're named, what the cultures are like, how do they dress. This, like, every planet can't just be counter Earth. Right? Another version of Earth, it's just a slightly different version of humans. So I like the imagination here. And I thought there was actually a lot of really cool shots that played into it. It felt very Star Wars-esque at times in the way they shot, like the imagination of some of the Kree spaceships. Like even the way Carol would enter and exit her ship sometimes, and how it had like a little screen for her to breathe, but she could go through it. And a couple cool shots where she was flying like face onto the camera and then stands up into the ship. If that makes sense. Yeah. Like there was just a lot of cool, fun imagination with the visuals that I really appreciated. So I wanted to start there.
I totally agree. And my only comment on the visuals, and again, this is not my forte, but I think I just didn't see, I thought the visuals looked great. Like I thought like, and there were things that, again, this stuff is just not a huge hang up for me. I think I understand some of the movies that people have pointed to issues with in the course of phase 4 and 5. I did not have any moments like that stood out to me. That's kind of all I'll say, like from the visual effects standpoint. I thought a lot of the choreography and stuff was really fun. Like,
how about the action choreography
and stuff? Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Like the way that they visualize that, the way that they lace the comedy in with like actually making it, like it wasn't like it was just all bumbling through. Like they actually, I love that every time someone would swap, even if they weren't ready for it, there was a way where they could kind of in the moment, like last minute, utilize their power set to get out of the situation that the person they had swapped with had gotten them into. Like it was just made for a lot of really creative kind of blocking.
Wasn't even just the swapping in general a fun idea?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like, I guess in the trailer we saw that, but I didn't realize how much the film would kind of hinge on that point.
Right. Well, and even at the end, kind of talking, like letting that become a thematic thing where it's like we're not entangled anymore, and Carol being a little bit bummed, recognizing that had been kind of a, like, she has been alone for so long, and that was something that had forced her into this community. Like they made it significant to the story, not just a gimmick. And I liked that.
So let's get to the writing in a second. As a quick follow-up, the choreography of some of the action sequences when they finally fight, what's her name now? Durden? Am I thinking of Fight Club?
You are thinking of Fight Club.
What is it? Help.
Bond?
It's not Deborah.
No,
oh,
it's not.
dang it.
That would be great.
Debbie? Should we just call her that from now on? Oh, man. This is where people, again, they're at home already looking up all this stuff. Darben. But when they finally fought her at the end and getting to see Kamala use her powers and stair step from the top and then like photon kind of from the bottom and like, I don't know, like I thought it was well thought out in the action sequences. Man, we got to talk about how our girl Kamala, dude, I thought she brought so much to this movie and I thought brought such a good side of Brie Larson out. Like it was so clutch to have her involved in this movie because of what it did for Carol as well. So you brought up the writing about Carol being a little bit disappointed. Clearly that was a major plot point, was like they were going to show you that Carol has flaws and like one of the things she does is she goes rogue, and it kind of a little bit Rogue One, Like, why was she gone all the time?
Yeah.
Like, they're kind of rogue wanting that it's actually a character flaw for her and that she needs to get better at accepting people on a team and being more team friendly. And I thought Kamala emphasizes that all so perfectly that Annika and I laughed multiple times at lines Kamala said.
Our whole theater was laughing. And it was, Iman Vellani is the star of that movie as far as I'm concerned. She absolutely killed it. Like, it made me want to go back and watch Miss Marvel again because I love her. I love, you brought this up at the top, and I can totally see this, especially for people that didn't watch Miss Marvel, which I was doing my own kind of exit interview, walking out of the theater with some people that we had one of these showings that was purely critics. Sometimes you'll kind of have some other
fans.
folks which is, I think both have merit, but.
Which, by the way, that in and of itself has been so strange, hasn't it? Like, it's 2 days before the release, and I don't know that anybody's really seen it before this because my showing was just critics. Like, Brandon Davis was in my theater. That's it.
Right.
And I don't think there was like a world premiere, I guess, because of the strike. I don't know, whatever. But we were all watching at the same time.
There hasn't, whatever's come out has just been like in the dark, like Marvel Nethernet. But I think that this is really the first time it's being discussed. But because of that in part, was just curious, like, especially whenever I saw people that looked like that
curmudgeon
were walking out to the they were like walking out to the car like at the same time that I was with my friend Emily, who people may recognize from the episode she's done on Screensaver and Screensaver Plus. But she's a huge Captain Marvel fan. It's like she went and saw the first Captain Marvel with Kansas and I and came out just loving it. And so it was really fun to go see it with her. She had a blast. We both talked about it. Yeah, she did. She loved it. But as we were walking out, like, we saw a couple people and I was just like, what do you think? Like, did you enjoy it? Because they
look
seemed
at you,
like
boots to the ground. Doing some
they
research.
just seemed like they seemed like not like really intimidating. Like they weren't wearing like really cool glasses or like beanies in the summer. So I felt like I could talk to them openly.
Shots fired.
And there's a lot there. I've been a beanie in the summer wearer. All right,
you have been. I
have been. You knew me in those days.
I know music.
Then I moved
probably,
to Austin.
Yes. So then your attire just got a lot weirder.
Yeah, weirder, but more breathable. This is linen. I talked to a couple people and was just curious to see like what their thoughts were, and I was struck by how many people that loved this movie and loved Kamala's role in this movie had not seen Miss Marvel.
Kamala Harris, Kamala Khan.
I do it every time.
Last time when we did last summer.
The problem is I never had that problem before we had a vice president that has a name that's like, I've read Marvel comics for so long that have Kamala Khan in them. See,
I was surprised by the same thing. At these screeners before the film starts, there aren't any previews, so it's just really quiet. And there's only like 10 people in there, so you can hear people talking. And the people behind us, I was surprised too. They were like, oh, I haven't started Loki yet. Oh, I haven't seen Miss Marvel. And I'm just thinking like, man, that's so surprising to me. If you're at a screener early, I would assume you've watched those things. But again, I think it's a little bit telling of the times that people hadn't seen those. But I feel like the vibe was mostly positive. I don't know what the Rotten Tomatoes score is going to come out to be, but I thought in general, people seem to really like it. Kamala is a legend, and I do love that they're leaning into it. Obviously, the post-credit scene with my other favorite new character, which is Kate Bishop. A crazy post-credit scene there. And again, I think they're leaning into it, which is the right call. I think one of Kevin Feige and Marvel's greatest strengths is they shoot out these webs and they see how things go, but they seem to always lean into the correct direction. Like Benson and Moorhead directing more stuff. That's correct. Of all the directors you've tried out, those are the guys to lean into right now. It's working. And I think the same thing sometimes when they do something like Miss Marvel and you can right away see like Iman Vellani is Miss Marvel. Let's lean into that a little bit.
Oh, and it was so, I mean, like her doing the Nick Fury bit in the way that she did.
Yes, it was so funny.
But like,
so funny.
I also loved.
I was laughing a lot when she was talking to Kate.
Did you immediately know it was Kate when you saw Lucky?
100%. Well,
that's what I love.
Yeah.
Like,
and you can see a silhouette of her bow.
Yeah, right. But like, I loved that feels like kind of a classic Marvel moment to me, where it's not, but now it's to the point where, for better or for worse, and I'm sure there are people that would say for maybe in both directions, but like now it's not like, oh man, I know this thing from the comics. Like we can talk about like Quasar, but it's like, I know Lucky immediately. And like, so you hear like people gasp in the theater because of the dog that is related to like an iteration of the Hawkeye character. But it's so funny because I was just thinking earlier this week, I had a weekend and put on Across the Spider-Verse for the first time since I saw it in theaters. I'd only seen it once.
What a film.
It's so great. We've talked about that on Screensaver here. But one of my takeaways was like, man, Haley Steinfeld is really talented. She's so good in that movie. And
that's my takeaway from Hawkeye.
Like, I know. And it made me think like, man, I hope we get some more Kate Bishop. And that was just like that was 4 days ago. And so it was so fun to then see that conjured here. And what a great, like we talked in Hawkeye about how great her interactions with Florence Pugh were. Yeah. And so I thought, and again, it worked here. Yeah. I
want to see more of that dynamic. How funny was Iman's delivery with, I'm putting together a team. Well, it's really just kind of me, but I have a lot of feelers out right now.
Well, like you're part of a bigger universe. Well, the universe is just me at the moment. But I
have a lot of feelers out. That's the line.
and I liked the please.
Please.
But I thought,
and she goes, you thought you were the only kid superhero? I'm 23. That's what Kate says.
Which I love. Which it's so great because there's been all the Young Avengers talk.
Yeah.
And I appreciate them recognizing that she is at this point. Like by the time we get like a Young Avengers movie, if that's coming, she will be like mid-20s.
Yeah.
As we're talking about Kamala, I really loved how much her family was in it, because that was one of my favorite parts of that show. And yours too, I know. Like all of those actors did such a brilliant job in the show. And that translated, like it's one of those weird things where anytime I saw them in a scene, I was like, oh, this is going to be great, because they always, whatever material they're given, they nail it. And it makes those scenes, like whether it needs to like add a little bit of emotional heft or it needs the comic relief, like either way, I just think that that's a brilliant cast. And I was really glad that they were given the kind of attention that they were in this movie. And like that it wasn't just like, I was kind of thinking it would be just the scene where they're in the house.
That's what I was going to bring up. A few of our listeners on Discord, which by the way, if you're just finding this podcast, we have a Discord channel that you can all chime in on. But a couple people had said like they were concerned at how big was Iman's role going to be. And just like what you said, I think there was a little bit of a fear that she might just be a fringe character and her family might just be that one scene. But wow, they went exactly the opposite. I mean, she had a ton of screen time. Her family was involved way more. Totally agree. Her family works so well in the show. It's another case of them really leaning into the Disney Plus side of it. So we talk about how the shows often are referencing the films, but it's not that common for the films to do the reciprocal, right? Give the love back, but totally here. I mean, if this doesn't drive you to go watch Miss Marvel, I don't know what would from a film perspective. My only question about that early on was, the reason I said that in my first review, you and I often talk about how sometimes characters can work so well in their role, so well that the director or Marvel or somebody becomes aware of it, and then they get elevated to a spot where all of a sudden it doesn't work as well.
Right.
You and I have talked about a little bit of a hesitation with like Agatha from WandaVision because she's so good in her role in WandaVision. But is your takeaway from WandaVision, oh, I need more Agatha? I don't know. And so I only thought of you for a split second, like towards the end when they're helping the Flurkins and stuff, where it's like, is there a point where these characters are getting elevated to a role where it's like, wait, this is not, like, do I need to see Kamala's dad being the one to help rescue people? But again, it doesn't really pull me out of it. I just wonder if some people are going to walk away being like, do they need to go to space there?
Yeah. I think what I like about it is it's
and that has nothing to do with their performance, by the way.
Oh no, yeah. I think that I could see either argument. I think that there's not a ton of plot development that's done by them. Like it's more just an opportunity for them to interact more with Samuel L. Jackson, which those moments always worked for me.
Yeah,
so I'm
that
happy
was
with.
so funny. When he's praying, and he goes, are you praying?
Don't
he goes,
stop
well,
now.
Don't stop now. We can use all the help we can get. That's what he says.
But I also think it furthers, like if I were to do my my like life's work apparently in trying to figure out the greater story objective and including them in the way that they did, I do think you could argue that it furthers especially with Kamala's mom, the idea that was established in the series of the kind of like loving and ultimately like really understanding and pretty cool parents, but also like traditionally overbearing in this way where it's like, and the balance that they were kind of finding at the end of that show. I think what was nice here is it wasn't really undone. Like it's not like we had one of the, like, you know, I think talking about the other major movie that has pulled directly from a Disney Plus series would be Multiverse of Madness. And that one is one where I think a lot of people would argue like part of the frustration is it seemed to kind of ignore part of Wanda's development in that. I think there are, again, arguments that can be made there on the other side. But I think that here, I really felt like it did a great job of picking up and kind of carrying that forward. And in a way, I almost appreciated that they were around and able to kind of be this grounding force within the movie, because I think otherwise it removes part of like one of the weird things about some of these space MCU films is Marvel is famously like the world outside your window. And at some point, like the space movies have to be the departure from the norm because it's supposed to be about people that look recognizable to us in some form. And so if everyone's just like, if we're getting more and more like out in either like the quantum realm or like in the shadow realm or in like even Counter Earth, like at some point we need to be grounded in the big movies, like not just in Disney Plus shows. So I thought that this was a good way of making what's going on with the Marvels, the three of them, like tangibly linked, not just to the Saber Station, but because Kamala's family was on the station, like linked back to Earth, and giving her that kind of like Peter Parker moment of like, if the universe isn't safe, you're not safe. And so I could totally see people thinking that there could have been less of that. But I also think that that's kind of the beauty of this movie having the approach that it had, which was like a very focused, like shockingly brief for a Marvel movie, like approach to a superhero film. Like,
shout out Candace.
Yeah, seriously. But it was, I mean, it's hard for me to complain about or to see people complaining about anything feeling super like extraneous. Because
yeah.
Even apart from the length, like I was just thinking, I was telling Emily afterwards, I really don't. Normally we come out of these and I can see people arguing that, oh, like there are these subplots that are going on and like why does that have to be in here? Like what we talked about with like Wakanda Forever, where like the way that you have Ironheart put in, like is that too? And there was none of that here. Like I thought it was
it was very direct to the point.
Yeah. Even like
really quick before we get off the family thing, and then I'll talk about the pacing with you. I wanted a quick add. Also shout out She-Hulk. And in the way that She-Hulk in the finale makes the joke about how, why are all these superheroes orphans or bad parents or don't have parents or whatever, I do think it is a smart call to have some characters not be that and to lean into that. So the fact that Kamala has a healthy family is one of the things that actually helps make her unique. Just like the way Daredevil being a Catholic helps make him unique from a lot of other things. And so I do appreciate them leaning into that side of it for sure. And like, that's another reason I kind of like them leaning into that with Clint.
Yeah.
Like that is so abnormal now, having like a stable family, stable relationship, that you gotta do it when you have it. Yes, the pacing. I thought Nia DaCosta actually did a really great job in that. For me, the movie actually didn't ever feel short. Like I never felt like, I was gypped or I was cheated on something.
Right.
And it never felt long. Everything was to the point. Like in this multiverse saga right now, this was kind of opposite of that, which is like, here's what's happening. There's a couple twists in the middle, but you mostly can track it. And nothing felt extraneous. Like no part of it felt like, what are we doing here? I'm with you. In general, I would say the runtime went from a concern to a win for me.
And I really appreciated just the, like how balanced and kind of symmetrical the whole thing felt. Shout out Thanos, where it was like
as all things should be.
I sometimes the thing that like when I look back on certain movies, like for instance, as much as I love Civil War, I think the one thing that's like always kind of hard when you look at that as part of the Captain America trilogy is just recognizing like, it is and it isn't. Like it's not like Ragnarok is the third Thor movie. Iron Man 3 is the third Iron Man movie. Civil War is not the third Captain America movie. It's like Avengers 2.5, which everybody has said since it came out. Doesn't make it a worse movie. Just like when you're watching it as a movie that is branded Captain America: Civil War, you're kind of like, this feels a little bit like you started out there and wound up somewhere else. I appreciate that as we're getting into like this, people clamoring more and more for like the multiverse saga and everything to move forward, that this wasn't a casualty of that. Like that this, I was getting nervous that this was going to be like kind of put up on the chopping block and it was just going to be this like bait and switch where, like we have like Carol and Monica and Kamala, but really like the multiverse is what this movie is about. And that would have been a bummer to me because I think that one makes the movie age worse. And two, I think it would just be a shame to have the creators and the performers and like the story ingredients that you had here and just kind of like throw it away as, again, like a plot bridge to another thing. Like I felt like this was a movie that knew that it wanted to be about primarily these three characters and their kind of unique backgrounds and relationships to each other and the way that they kind of inform their own perspectives on themselves. And that's ultimately what it's about. Like you can kind of trace all of that through the whole thing. And it just feels like a very coherent, like cohesive. And like when I say symmetrical, like you look at it and it's like, like based on the movie that's kind of set up at the beginning, like, this tracks. Like this feels like a solid standalone movie that, whatever people are wanting, I don't think people are going to walk in and be like, oh, well, it's just another chapter. It's chapter 6 in like this era of Marvel. Like, it's like, no, this was a particular movie that I thought made a mark, like made a really like recognizable mark when you look at like the visual stuff we were talking about, even like going back to the Miss Marvel kind of graphics that we praised so much in the show.
Yeah, at the very beginning.
Yeah, like the vibe, like it feels to me like this is like a particular brand of a Marvel film that I would be happy to revisit. But if not, like it's here. And I love that. And I love that it doesn't have to be like a means to an end.
100% agree. There's so much to get into. There's actually way more to get into than I thought there'd be to get into. Really quickly, before we take a break, I want to say, because you just said this, we talked about Iman's performance, and then we talked about how Kamala's dynamic really enhanced the Carol thing, but I don't want that to be missed, how much I enjoyed. It's the same thing about like if Kamala could meet Ant-Man. Like it's so fun to have a character who grew up in this universe, a massive fan of the Avengers, as if they were a sports team or, you know, celebrities basically, and then getting to see this mega fan meet Carol. And I thought all of those interactions, like almost all of them worked really perfectly for me. Kamala bringing like such a beautiful innocence and naivete, even maybe to like that first attack on the Skrull planet where she is brutally horrified that we're letting some of these people die.
Right.
Just has such a good like synergy with like a Spider-Man type character.
Yeah.
But having her be around this ultra powerful Carol and just that dynamic and it really centered that. Like it made that an emotional core because she was there and not just superheroes doing their thing and saving people. It was like, no, look at these people that need help still. And I thought all the funny dynamics really worked with them too. Where she's trying to come up with a funny nickname and we're a team. Like even the moments that were spoiled in the trailer worked still for me with her. And like her seeing Nick Fury the first time really was funny. Like that really landed. Yeah. Oh, dude, like.
Every one of her oh my gods, which there were a lot, made me laugh.
I don't know. It really worked. We have so much to get into. I have a really fun giveaway I want to do. Our friends at Cinemark, which they've been so good to us for so long, have given us 4 $25 gift cards to give away to you listeners. And here's what we're going to do. The first 4 people to go sign up for Friends from Work Plus, which is our bonus feed where we pump out a ton of bonus MCU content, early access to things like tonight I shared my initial 2-minute reaction to the Marvels on Patreon. You can sign up on Patreon, on Substack. There's actually the first tier of it. You can sign up on Apple or Spotify as well. So anyone who does that and commits to a year, the first 4 people are going to receive a $25 Cinemark gift card, courtesy of our friends at Cinemark, which, by the way, shout out Cinemark. It was so fun, again, just to be back in the theater. You know, our listeners know that we're big movie theater people, obviously, but just the entire experience. I was in such a good IMAX today. Incredible sound, incredible visual, concessions, just being together with people, like you said, doing an exit survey. All that stuff is so much fun, and Cinemark allows you to do that. And by the way, we were talking about concessions earlier. If you go to Cinemark, they have special, like, what would you call it? Help me with it. Special concessions that are Marvel branded, and you can get actual cups,
buckets and cups and stuff.
Yeah, like you know, if you go to like Disney World, you can get like the souvenir cup. They have like a souvenir cup or souvenir popcorn bowl that's branded with the Marvels, actually lights up. Just kind of fun. So again,
I got one of those for Love and Thunder at a Cinemark.
There you go.
Still have it.
So again, the first 4 people that sign up for Friends from Work Plus anywhere and commit to a year of it, the first 4 of you will get a $25 Cinemark gift card. Okay, we have so much more to get into. We'll be right back after a quick word from these sponsors.
And if you listen to this podcast, that means you like comic book movies, and maybe you also like comic books like I do. And if that's true, you should check out our comics partner, Organic Priced Books. We've been super excited to see a ton of people heading over there lately to buy things. I don't know what. I'm honestly curious what everyone's flocking there to buy, but we've been going through a lot on the comic book club side, which is Friends from Work Plus, reading some James Tynion horror comics, as well as some Jonathan Hickman Avengers stuff. And there's all sorts of fun stuff there right now, including a bunch of new Invincible books to kind of correspond with the new season of that show on Amazon, a new Captain Marvel omnibus from the Kelly Sue DeConnick run that a lot of the modern stuff in the MCU has been based on. So really, if you've been looking for an excuse to get into comics, there are so many good jumping on points right now, including stuff that Friends from Work Plus is doing. So please go check out organicpricebooks.com. And if you are there, use Friends from Work as the discount code to get an even greater discount on what I should say are already some of the best, most affordably priced comics out there, which is why, or one of the big reasons why we like partnering with them so much, is it's a chance to partner with a, for me, locally Texas-owned bookstore that is committed to giving you good quality books at prices that really no one, including Jeff Bezos, can compete with. So go to Organic Price Books and check out some good comics.
Okay, I said there's still so much more to get into. I'll let you steer the next talking point. Where do you want to go?
Ooh, man. I've got so many, but one that I'm just worried I'm going to forget in us talking so much about Kamala. You know, you and I have talked a lot about how much the Thor franchise and really the way Thor appeared in certain Avengers films as well, but things that came later in the MCU, how it kind of retroactively made the earlier Thor appearances better because we kind of had more context and just more reason to be like invested in that character, who in the first Thor is pretty stiff and pretty one note. And I think to me, that was what I was looking for this movie to do with the Captain Marvel character, who I just think by nature of the first movie with her, anytime you kind of lean into the amnesia plot device, you risk like not giving your audience a ton of time to connect with that character. Mm-hmm. There were some really, really memorable moments. One of my favorite moments in the last few years in the MCU is the like kind of her standing up and getting her powers thing with the incredible score there and the flashbacks. And like, there are great moments that they utilize with what you have, but you just don't have a lot of time with Carol. You have a lot of time with Veers, who's trying to figure out who she is and where she comes from. And this is the first time that we've actually gotten to spend time with that person. And I found this iteration of Carol to be so charming. And I also just have to say, the character design, like, she looked so cool this entire movie. Oh,
gosh.
She looked
so
cool.
much better. Yeah, it's so cool. Her actual outfit is dope. And then she switches a couple times and it's dope. And she looks badass when she peels off the top layer too, but it's still like hanging over her back, which I know it sounds stupid, but I was thinking like that actually is a really practical thing that I enjoy seeing. It's like when Spider-Man, how he actually puts a suit on or off versus it just kind of always being there. Yeah. I like seeing the practical ramifications of her having to actually like put it on, take it off, etc. But also the logo, the colors, the fit, it's all perfect.
It was like the vibe was exactly like it had the kind of like effortless, badass, cool energy that I always like, that it felt like the first movie was wanting me to read, but wasn't actually like giving me. Like it was like, it just kept saying, this is a really cool person, but it didn't give me that many opportunities to see that person. And this was just like, it was that, but because we got to see the stuff that she's actually thinking about and wrestling with and reflecting on, like I like the way that it starts, not just by way of flashback, but by like seeing her perspective on certain things. And the other piece of that you brought up earlier by having Miss Marvel in the mix that I loved is you see her through Kamala's eyes. And that makes her, like, in those moments, like the "Oh Captain, My Captain" moment, which was another laugh for me, but is also like, yeah, she does look awesome. Like, it's this great, it's like the way you feel with Thor in Infinity War and the way you feel with Captain Marvel, like in that moment in Endgame. But again, you just like, in this context especially, like, I think Thor, because in the original Avengers context, he was just so clearly the one that was way stronger, that it was always really fun to see like Captain America in a situation where he's kind of like fighting for his life, and then he's so relieved when Thor shows up.
It's why it makes that moment in Infinity War so good. Like, you guys are all screwed now just because it's like, okay, finally he's here. Like, without him, we're in trouble a little bit, but now that he's here, we're good. Yes, totally agree.
And in that works so well in that movie, in part because we've seen Thor lose so much, right? So it's like you're also rooting for him, and I loved that with Carol here. Not only do you see how much she's struggling with what she thought was the right thing and the consequences of that, which, by the way, the movie never... I kept waiting for the turn where you realize that actually it wasn't what she did. It was more the way that the Kree responded, which I still think is probably the case, and you can read into that. And you can also see that the way like the villain at the end doesn't choose to allow Carol to go back and just heal Hala. She chooses to make a last stand. So like there's room there for kind of a nuanced interpretation, which I like. But I also appreciate that it didn't cheapen what Carol's wrestled with by making it not like by exonerating her. Like that is a consequence of what she did, thinking that she was doing the righteous thing by going back and getting rid of the Supreme Intelligence. And I thought like it gave her a complicated background, but then also the other piece of that practically, when we're talking about like the vulnerability side, is I thought it was really creative for the Bengal to be able to absorb her power, which then gave us these moments where we didn't have to have like a whole like Iron Man 3 situation where Carol like loses her powers the entire movie, which like those things kind of can be exhausting to me. Because at some point I just want to see like the hero get to do the hero things. And so I like that wasn't here, but there were the moments where you're like, oh, like that's not going to work though. Like you're not like, you can still go do things that are really cool, but you can't do this by yourself, because if you try to blast her, one, you might swap out with another one of the three, but even if you don't, you can absorb it. And then, so you see her absorb Carol's powers. Carol kind of for the moment look weak, which is not something we've ever seen from that character since she's been powered up, and then like thrown across the landscape, which was like, you need those moments to then have the inspiring, like them getting up from that moment. And so it all, like all of that worked to where I was just like, this is the Captain Marvel sequel that I was looking for.
That was the Robbie rant we all needed and we were all waiting for with bated breath.
You knew it was coming.
I mean, the rant sometimes gets so epic that I don't even know how to respond, because we covered like 100. We started with the outfit and then we ended up there with her power.
We can end with the outfit. It's still awesome.
I totally agree. It was a much needed step towards humanizing Carol a little bit, which, you know, from so many different levels for me has been my biggest concern with the character. Is like, if we never see vulnerability in any way, like we don't see vulnerability in like, can she actually take physical damage? We don't see vulnerability in the other films of what you just said, like, does she even wrestle with the consequences of her decision? Like, okay, now we're getting hints that Monica is upset with how she left, but we've never seen Carol care at all about that. Like, Carol's always just kind of flying around happy and using light speed, and it's all fine. So this was a much needed step towards all those things. You're right. To actually see Brie Larson have to show some emotion with regretting a decision or not being there for the people. And I do like that that's a seed that they've been planting now for a while, all the way back to Don Cheadle saying, where were you this whole time? And then little things of like, Secret Invasion, the issues that are arising because she didn't help them find a planet. I thought one of the coolest interactions was getting to see her talk with the leader of the Skrulls about how she's failed, where he basically was like, look, I'm not trying to be mean, but we don't need you. Every time you show up, it gets a little bit worse. We were close to working this out. Like, those are the kind of things I need to see as a viewer, because now this character has some dimension. And I'm just reiterating what you're saying, but totally agree. There were a lot of interactions there that really worked. And then you're also right that having Kamala around only then emphasizes, just like you said, the badass parts. So the badass parts are even more badass and the humanized parts are more human.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's just the extremes are better, instead of kind of like the first Captain Marvel, I feel like most of the movie just kind of operates right here, just down the middle. Most of it's kind of like, here's this character. And I do feel like we went places. I will say that I still don't think it's fully formed yet. Like, in the same way that people are going to laugh at this, I got to get this in here. Like, we feel like as a character, right, Thor takes such a big jump in Dark World. And that's laughable because there's so many plot things. I mean, they use literal poles to stop a convergence. It makes no sense. But the actual character development and some of the humor and some of the way Chris Hemsworth just kind of lets his guard down is so much better in the second Thor over the first Thor. But I still think there's more there with Ragnarok and Love and Thunder. I feel that way here. I still think there's another level of vulnerability for Carol. I still would like to know what her actual physical kryptonite is. The Bangle did a good job of showing that, like, yes, her powers can sometimes be deflected, like you said, but I still would like to see, like, what can actually take her out. Not that she has to die, but like, show me blood on her face. Like, someone can actually beat her to the pulp, Like, we know she can fly through ships. I think there's one more level there that hopefully Captain Marvel 3 or the next Avengers film or whatever can give us. And honestly, a huge step forward in that department for me was her actually just moving back into a house in Louisiana. And like little comments of like, shout out you. Making it a little bit of like a joke about how she maybe slept with this prince, right?
Yeah.
Like just humanizing her a little bit. So there were steps there. I think there's another level. That's my Kyle rant to follow your Robbie rant. So
no, I think that that's fair, because I think with Thor, I still think that comparison is apt because of the way his arc went, both creatively, but also the role that he has within the universe as like the kind of quasi Superman figure. I think that it was important that even though we saw Hela be stronger than Thor, that was more of a, that wasn't like, oh, there's this external threat that has leveled up kind of beyond Thor. Because it came from within Asgard, it would be like, oh, Odin can beat Thor. Like, that wouldn't have ever really surprised us. So that wasn't as much of a sea change moment as having Thanos, like Infinity War opening with him just like carrying Thor like it's nothing. And I think that like it was important that we hadn't really seen anyone do that until that moment. And that was like really, that set the stage for who Thanos was and what those two movies would be. And so I think it would make sense that if there's a similar arc, while I wouldn't expect them to follow the exact same beats, that Carol would probably have that like struggle that she can't quite win with whoever that next villain is, whether it's Kang or, now we're talking Loki again. But I think you're right. I think that like the Thor: The Dark World comparison as to like her progression, because again, I would challenge people.
Yeah,
whatever you want to say about Thor: The Dark World, go back and just watch Hemsworth in that movie. And his comedic timing in that movie is like, he's nailing it. He's figuring out the character. not given as much to work with there as he ultimately is in Ragnarok, and that's where he's like given the runway. But I'm just saying,
Friends from
I
Work,
think you're right.
The Thor: The Dark World podcast. We've
always has been, always
we've
will be.
had that exactly. I was gonna say we've had that title for so long. I love it. Oh, I love it. While we're on Thor, I had no idea Valkyrie was going to show up. No idea.
Oh, same. Yeah. Man.
And maybe that was the thing that was spoiled online. That's my guess. That was the thing that people got spoiled for them. I didn't see any of that.
Same.
I saw the Bifrost and I went, oh my gosh. So good to see her. From a plot perspective, was she taking the scrolls back to Earth? Is that my understanding?
I think so. Which I then thought about our conversation during Secret Invasion episode 1 or 2. When we talked about the idea of Asgard being this place where
Haven.
other aliens are coming.
Yeah. And then the end of Secret Invasion, you're wondering how that could all escalate too now, especially if more of them are coming back. But also
more Skrulls specifically, yeah.
Yeah, but also just poor Skrulls, man. Like in the MCU, they've just been dumped on multiple times. And I actually really felt sad with that entire sequence. It's like they finally built this really beautiful new home. And it was, again, by the way, that's another imagination thing. I just love the visual of that. Like just a totally unique and distinct town that's not just generic Earth City. And the dancing, singing planet, also just totally different. But they've had a hard time over there, man. They've just not gotten. More of them died again. I was already thinking how many are even
so
left.
Many,
like how many
yeah.
have gotten off Earth to get to that planet, and now half of them died again or whatever.
And that's one of the scenes that I think I'm going to go back and not enjoy watching because it's a dark scene, but appreciate the dynamic there between
so many dynamics.
But like what you called out earlier about like the perspective that Kamala brings to that. And then now knowing what we learn about Carol's experience and how she had to be feeling during that. And then to hear that from Kamala and then she knows like her biggest fan. Like, I think that there are a lot of layered things happening with the dynamic as a whole, but the scroll of it all, and I guess more the Kree as they respond to that. I thought it was so geniusly done the way that they utilize the Kree here, because the MCU has always handled them so differently. Like in the comics, the Kree were who we thought the Kree were for the bulk of Captain Marvel, the film, which is like they're the good guys. They look like Earth people. They're the warrior class, and the Skrulls are like the evil, deceptive terrorists. And that's just kind of that runs through most of Marvel. Granted, there's some really great, like the Kree Skrull war that so much of the first Captain Marvel film was based on does add some nuance there. But ultimately, the Skrulls are more the villains than the Kree are.
Right.
And so it's like I was always
Which
curious.
we loved for the Skrulls' sake, the twist there. We loved that.
Yeah.
That was an awesome part of the first movie. But yeah, then what you're left with is a Kree that is bad. I thought they did a good job here kind of humanizing them again now. And now all of a sudden you felt bad for some of the consequences.
Right.
That they're all not just Ronin.
Well, but I also loved the Ronin reference there, which was great, like Captain Marvel
100%.
throwback, but a specific Guardians reference about my predecessor being destroyed. And that's what I like about the way they use the Kree here is it's still like it's this hubris where like the movie doesn't explicitly let Carol off the hook in that she acknowledges that she rushed into that situation, not fully understanding the implications of what she was doing.
Right.
And I like that layer. But she didn't cause the sun to fail or like the drought. Like they caused that.
So you like that layer too.
Yeah, by the Civil War, but they are choosing to externalize that and blame all of that on Carol, and then basically tell the Skrulls, we're in the same boat as you. We understand more than anybody, so we're going to make this easy on you and help relocate and steal your atmosphere.
And even when they show up on that other water planet, the prince there goes, "Why are you here?" And she's like, "We've cast our judgment on you already." And it's like, what for? Like, what?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I like though. And by the way, okay,
consistent.
when you and I do the friendly reminder / screen recaps on YouTube, I sent you like a 1-page script and I said, "Can you please just fix this and add stuff?" And then you sent me back this masterfully written 3-page thing. So the script is always shout out Robbie. But one of the things I love that you included in that is you said that they are often the military might of the galaxy. And then in this movie, which by the way, if you don't know comics, you don't know that. I mean, you know Ronan in the MCU. Right. But here they included that line from Carol where she says at one point, the Kree colonized 25% of the galaxy, which was, again, a shout out to you. I'm like, yeah, you're right. They must be a military might if they're capable of doing that.
It feels like a very, almost like a British Empire kind of a thing. Like the way that they're painting them. And that's what but I like each culture having like their strengths and weaknesses, you know. Give each culture and planet that you are asking us to invest in a different, unique characteristic. And so if the characteristic of the Kree is all these things you're saying and that they have the military might, I love that. And it's such if we're talking about like Thor the Dark World, that's where you have such a difference in how we feel about the villain's motivations and like the whole group that make up like the villain's army. Like the Dark Elves just for some reason want everything to be total darkness forever. And at that point they'll just be happy. Whereas here, like you actually see, I get why she is motivated to do all this. Now, I think what adds again complexity to it is every time she's like hitting the bands together, if she were really doing this to help her people, she would be doing it in this kind of like Thanos way almost, where it's like, I don't want to murder everybody, but I like mistakenly think that this is the only way, so I'm going to do it. But he's not like giddy every time that he goes and takes out half of the population. Whereas like she's doing the like full evil grin. And I did like the moment at the end, like I was saying, of her like being given the option to try to save her planet now without any further violence, and her actively choosing to just like toss it all, not knowing what's going to happen, and maybe sacrificing her planet and world and galaxy in the process. Like it adds that, like you get where she's coming from and you empathize with the Kree for what they've dealt with, but also it's like it's not a situation where she's just misunderstood. Like she is also just a bad actor in this to some degree. I mean, anyone that like masters the creepy smile in that way is like not out there for like the planetary welfare.
Sure. My camera's overheating. That's not good. Totally agree on her. I did think that it was maybe a little bit, tiny bit cheap that Carol could just fix the sun by just flying through it really easily. Like, I thought that Monica kind of set up like, well, you can do this, but Carol was like, I've never done this. I don't know if I could do it, blah, blah, blah. And then it just was so easy. And I'm kind of like, if that was all it took from the beginning, wouldn't Carol have known that Hala was in shambles and thought of that herself if it was that easy? I guess I wish I thought there was a little bit of a struggle there, or like for a second I maybe thought Carol would come out like really hurt, or we wouldn't see her fly through the top of it and it'd be like, oh my gosh, what happened to Carol?
Icarus style.
And it was kind of like, she just went right through it and it was like, oh, okay, well, that was easy. Should have done that from the beginning.
Well, I guess for me, I didn't mind it because she couldn't have fixed the other, you know, if they had like these 3 issues that they had to fix by stealing things from other planets, like she couldn't have fixed the other 2. So and I think like granted, you could. I'm not going to get into like whatever the climate science of all of that would be, but
Sure.
that made me feel like it was less cheap than if that had just been an option all along that would have solved it.
One question on the actual bangle front with that. My understanding, and again, I've only seen it one time, was that the bangle, right, was able to open the portal.
Mm-hmm.
The portal. What was it called?
Jump point.
The jump point, so that she could then bring the other planet's resources in. But why did she need the two? Like, why at the very beginning of the movie did she want two if one was enough to do it? Because, again, it's in the film because her sidekick a couple times says, like,
right,
it's not ready with that amount of energy. You really need both or something. He says something like that. But then I was just kind of curious, like, why did she immediately die when she did have the two? And if she was going to die from the energy of the two, what was the plan in the first place? Or she just didn't know that?
I think she didn't know that.
And they called the bangle a quantum element, by the way, which is, hot button word right now in the MCU.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's something that I'll have to watch again to see the mechanics of that, because there were a couple things like that where between Monica and Carol like touching the jump point and then the band and Kamala's bangle.
Oh gosh.
Right.
I'm sorry, I can't take him anywhere.
I understand why that was all like the same energy source, because she used the one band to open it up and then they touched the jump point, and then at the other end of the other band was Kamala. I just don't really understand what she would have been able to achieve with the two that she wasn't able to with the one, other than the fact that they always looked kind of glitchy, like they were sort of like half open and not supposed to be. And then they talked about needing both to close it. So maybe the understanding is she would have had more control. Maybe that's something that we'll find out more of when we get follow-up with the, variant of Monica's mom that we meet in the post-credit scene, since she's got both.
Okay, before that, also Kamala was left with both of them, right? At the very end of the movie, she has both of them now.
Yeah.
Because I thought I saw one shot at the very end where she's hugging somebody, her mom maybe, and she only has one on, I thought. So then I was like, wait, did they not give her both at the end?
No, you're right. No. Because I had the same thought. I thought I saw a scene after that where she had both, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just thinking of that post-credit scene. Because I definitely saw one after that final, like after Monica's gone, where Kamala doesn't have both, but there's also, doesn't Carol give her the one when she gets back? So I don't know if I'm sure there's a scene, again, this is the hard thing about us being,
it's probably very obvious. We just weren't paying attention to it.
But okay, they didn't make it a moment, and that's telling in and of itself. Because they make it a moment with Maria having, like, you see that she has both, and they talk about the importance of both. Before I forget, on that point, the other thing that I loved is explaining the origin of the jump points, which we've seen since Guardians.
Yes.
That was so cool.
What I loved was just how cool they look. I always think they look cool, but I thought it was executed amazingly well here. Yeah. And to get to see that shot of like Kamala in space and Monica in space, because she's always wanted to, going through those jump points, but to Carol, it's just normal. Some of those visuals were so cool, man. Yeah. And yes, I agree. An explanation of actually how they work was pretty cool. This is getting really, really long. We don't normally go this long, so if you've made it this far, thank you. But our episodes aren't normally this long. Although I think our last couple initial reactions were this long. I'm going to rapid fire a couple of things real fast.
Yeah.
I thought that the music was really good. Shout out friend of the pod, Laura Cartman. Yeah. And I was in an IMAX theater where it just really hit me. Like it was a great mix, great sound editing, whoever did it. Very happy with the audio engineer. Also, I just have to shout out the 3 right now off the top of my head, music placements that were in here were so spectacular and such an upgrade over my least favorite music placement in the entire MCU. My least favorite needle drop, which is I'm Just a Girl in the first Captain Marvel. When these 3 hit, the first 2 being, and it might have even been a Beastie Boys song. I can't remember, but there's like a dope like hip hop track where they're first fighting, and it's so badass and it works so perfectly. And then the ironic one with all the Flurkins,
the memory,
the fun like opera thing.
Cats.
I just thought they all worked so well. Wait, is that from Cats? Are you kidding me? That's okay. So then even more bonus points.
Oh, it's excellent.
So shout out there on the music front as well. The last thing I wanted to point out, a couple of just like, I guess not critiques, but they're really small, just questions. There were just a couple of times that I felt like something either went on too long or something went on a little too short. Where like, for example, let me give you a scene. Like right after they fail on the water planet and Kamala makes them go through the jump point and then they end up on some planet with a field and they're all talking for a second. Like I thought a couple of those transitions were a little quick into how fast it went from, no, you guys don't get it, it's all my fault, to, okay, we're all good because we kind of hugged it out. Like that's maybe the one spot where I felt like the pacing was a little bit off. Like for me to buy that moment more, I needed a little more background there. So like I said, I felt like there were a couple of moments that were just a little bit too quick. And then there are a couple of moments I thought were maybe a little bit too long. Like I really appreciated the humor and the creativity in the singing planet and thought that was pretty funny and a huge win. But then like just towards the very end of it, I started thinking like, are we doing this a little too long? Like, are we leaning into this just a little too much? So I thought there were just a couple of times like that. It's really minor, where I felt like maybe I was a little bit disjointed with the film because of a few things that were not exactly how I would have probably done them.
No, I get that. I would say the singing planet, I was kind of prepared to have a hard time with, but I thought it was played perfectly, in part because, again, it's the beauty of having the grounded, like Monica, Kamala characters to be like, this is like, and not like, just this is like, weird as a throwaway. But I also loved like the way that Carol just like plays it. Like she's not really embarrassed. She just is like, she leans into it and then is like, okay, like that's it. Like now we're done. We have to talk. And then like,
I was gonna say
he's
that
bilingual.
that moment saved it for me where she's like, no, seriously, stop. We have to talk. Like stop. Right. and they're all kind of like singing the parts. Yeah.
That like all of that. I thought that was really well imagined and
95% a win for me. So let me clarify that.
Well, and what I will say to not be just like pure apologist, I would say throughout the entire film, if I had an issue, I don't know that I had moments that I felt went too long, but there like as much as the pacing was good and there was no extraneous stuff and it felt focused, there were just a few scenes that I would not. I could have stood to have another 5 minutes and like give us a few more seconds per certain scenes, where it was just like a little like even the opening scenes where we first saw the swap, it just things started happening really quickly. And it kind of jumps you right into the situation, which I think on a rewatch might actually work better for me now that I kind of know the context of the movie more.
For me, it was more the emotional moments. Like I thought all the action stuff was perfect, like the perfect length. Like I didn't think it went on too long. I was thankful the last fight didn't go on so long that it was a whole thing. For me, it was a couple of those times where like Carol and Monica dialoguing about why didn't you come back? Like I could have used like you said, a minute and 30 seconds more there just so that I felt like I'm in that moment. And the moment I was talking about for sure for me, I don't know. But again, I really enjoyed it. Just
oh no, for sure. But I like that's again, it's something I'll have to see more. Like I find that pacing is something that it really changes for me once I've seen movies because I know like where we're heading. But that is something that I felt some in terms of just some jarring stuff. But I'm also the guy that always likes to kind of sit in things for a sec.
You love pacing and writing. I thought the writing was really good, by the way, for the most part.
I thought so too. Oh, and okay, that's maybe the last thing I wanted to say before we talk briefly about the end credit scene.
Which is how we'll close, yes.
Which will also be a perfect time to talk a little bit more about Monica. We've talked a lot about Monica in the context of the other characters, but kind of where she is and where that leaves her. But I just want to say, I was such a fan of Samuel L. Jackson in this movie.
Yeah.
I had a blast. This is why I had so much fun with this movie in general, is the things that I always struggled with a little bit about Captain Marvel, like, were either made better here or corrected here. Because I always felt like the chemistry between him and Brie Larson is great. And I like in seeing them in other projects, like they just have good chemistry naturally. But I didn't feel like the writing was super strong in Captain Marvel, and it didn't give them a ton to work with. Like, their delivery of certain things were great, and his delivery was great, but it was like, it felt like he was giving, kind of a Herculean effort to lift up some like pretty mediocre lines.
They had way better scenes here. Yeah, all the comms stuff.
Yeah, the timing was just so great. Like, I thought.
I love Samuel L. Jackson bringing Samuel L. Jackson to that character.
Yeah. It was
like hey, stop touching crap, okay?
I like that's new rule.
Yeah,
don't touch things, especially mysterious glowing things.
Yeah.
It's like, and that dynamic, like that was something that I heard in one of the trailers or TV spots. The like, oh, if it isn't my favorite, one-eyed man of intrigue, and the prodigal, what is it?
Something of the galaxy.
Of the galaxy. Yeah. But in the context, again, like often happens for me with the Marvel movies, like that felt like a really natural, like, I liked seeing them connect again, and it didn't feel forced. And I loved the kind of like the understanding of what their lives have looked like. Like, it isn't just, and we got some of this from Secret Invasion, but it's not that he hasn't talked to her at all since the first Captain Marvel movie. But like now we know a little bit more about why, and he clearly like still has he has a soft spot and a friendship with Carol that is very different than what we've seen him have with any of the Avengers, or even like Coulson or Hill. It's just a different, like, I really liked his addition to this. Like, I guess I should say I was thinking it would be at like a Far From Home level for me, which I didn't have any complaints with, aside from the kind of telos of it, just his performance. Like, I thought it was great. But this was like it was like he added the right amount of like gravitas when I needed him to. Like his reaction when they step off the ship without Monica was great in that moment. But also like, so like kind of Quentin Tarantino style, like funny Samuel L. Jackson in this in a way we haven't gotten a ton of in the MCU.
Okay, so let's finish today's episode, our initial reactions to the ending of the entire film. I think there's a few different points here that are worth pointing out. Before the post-credit scene, I do freaking love, like, let's freaking go, that Kamala, ironically, did kind of prove herself to Nick Fury throughout the film. Like, she joked, is this an Avengers test?
Right.
And I love that they kind of leaned into, well, it kind of was. And when she gets off the spaceship at the very end and walks up to Nick Fury, there's just a really fun dynamic there already where, Kamal looks up to him and he's a hero to her, but then he says right away, like, what happened? He can tell something's wrong. And it feels like they were already connecting right there at the end. And I love that that's how we're leaving the character. Then she goes to form the team with Kate Bishop. It just feels like now Kamala is so brought in from Nick Fury and has earned his trust. And that just, I don't know, I love leaving her there to me.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, and so we're actually punching this final ending because we could not end this episode without talking about the final post-credit sequence. So we did talk about how Miss Marvel is seemingly taking charge of a few aspects of the MCU with Nick Fury and all of that, but we haven't touched on this post-credit sequence of Monica getting stuck in an alternate reality. An alternate reality that appears, I think, to have Kelsey Grammer's Beast in it. Now, hear me out on this. Everyone, by the time you're listening to this, may know that already. We can't confirm that's what it was at the time of our screening. I think that's Kelsey Grammer. If it is, and I'm going to operate under the assumption that that was Kelsey Grammer, that's a bigger deal for a few reasons. We have seen that there are parallel realities in the MCU, a la Multiverse of Madness, but we've never had one of our characters get stuck in one. Mm-hmm. And is that going to be important for the future? Is that the bridge just starting? And the second thing I thought was really important was Beast says something to Monica like, well, our leading theory is that you are from a different reality and now you're trapped here. But obviously, that's not possible, so we know that can't be it. And that just got me thinking. First of all, that reminded me of Doctor Strange in No Way Home when he says, this shouldn't be happening. This can't be possible. But also, is that a little bit of a tie into Loki? Is that a little bit possible because branches are no longer being pruned and multiverses are starting to touch each other? Is this the beginning of a few incursion type things? So that's my takeaway. That line I thought was really important. And now we have Monica in a different reality that appears to be maybe, we don't know this, the X-Men reality from Days of Future Past, that world.
Yeah, a couple of kind of rapid fire things here because I think that this is going to open up a lot of opportunity for theorizing that we will give its due time, but not here because we have already given this more than its due time in this episode.
Sure.
But for people that are wanting that, I'm really excited to dig into a lot of these things. But just in the moment here, another thing that I really loved was the actual moment of Monica waking up and thinking that her mom was back and the callback to her scene waking up in WandaVision, which I then loved because there's that moment in WandaVision where Monica says, if I could bring my mom back, I know I would. And at the time, she obviously doesn't have the ability to do that in the way that Wanda does. After that, we see Wanda try to do that in kind of this same way by going to another reality. So I think that there's some interesting symmetry there that, like, for a movie that in a lot of ways is following up more on the Captain Marvel film and the Miss Marvel show for good reason, I liked that this was kind of one more WandaVision, Multiverse of Madness thing. The other piece there that, it's a little confusing because X-Men, like that's the property that they chose to make the focus in Multiverse of Madness. So I'm wondering if other people may be confused walking away, like if they're looking at, even if it is Kelsey Grammer, if that is for sure the same one that made an appearance in X-Men The Last Stand and in Days of Future Past. Because we obviously got a Patrick Stewart that was not supposed to be the Xavier from those films. But kind of putting that aside, if that is in fact what we're getting, and I think it is, I think that that's the point. I think that there's also a moment when they go through the hex that I missed initially, but whenever the like, kind of jump point graphics, I think that it ends such that you actually see an X outlined. And I think that kind of confirms, I think it's like just an Easter egg thing, but if you know, you know. Anyway, so I think you're right. We operate under the assumption that is the X-Men universe. What I love about that is if you kind of look at what is admittedly a really, really messy timeline in the Fox movies.
Yeah.
And one that we will be exploring here on Friends from Work Plus soon. The big hole there, like if you kind of look at the original timeline and then the prequel type movies, and then really, I think for all intents and purposes, and not just because I think it's a good ending note, but I just think it makes the most sense to kind of think of all of that as culminating with Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
I think Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix really like confuse things, and I would be kind of surprised if we see any references to those as this starts being worked in. But regardless, those are still supposed to take place in the past prior to the like original X-Men films.
Right, yeah.
So the real like space
Their
is
timeline is wonky. If you want to
man.
freak out about a timeline, that's the one to lose your mind about.
The space that we've never explored really is what happens between Days of Future Past and Logan. And Hugh Jackman, whenever Deadpool 3 first was announced, came out and said that Deadpool 3 is supposed to take place in between those movies, essentially. And so what I think could be really interesting here is if Monica is in the original X-Men universe, and if in fact, which we don't know to be true, but if in fact that is just like Deadpool 3 will occur in between Days of Future Past and Logan, then it would kind of make sense that in this universe where Beast is there as Kelsey Grammer and Charles is at least alive and around, that this may also be the universe that Deadpool 3 kicks off in.
Oh.
And that's kind of a big deal.
Like the other way around from what we were thinking, that it actually starts in that universe and somehow he works his way into ours instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of fascinating things with that too, because it feels like they're setting up what I just said. They're setting up that in the MCU, the one we know, the universe we know, that reality, that they are going to use some event like this, some multiversal event, to ultimately pick some of the mutants to come over to ours. But if you're going to do that, why include that Kamala and maybe Namor are also mutants already?
Right.
So I'm fascinated to see how they're going to blend those two, because either there are mutants here already or not, you know?
Yeah, no, it is an interesting, like the timing on that is interesting. But I do really like the idea of the X-Men characters being the actual characters that we have some level of investment with, like particularly Wolverine.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to be the Deadpool that we know, but I think, you know, there's always this, is it going to be like a slightly different version kind of a thing? And they'll probably have to do that to some degree just to clean up some of the plot hole craziness of X-Men. But
if it was after Days of Future Past, help me on this, but before Logan, would it then be like Fassbender and McAvoy? Theoretically?
No, it would be Stewart and McKellen if they were to come over.
Because in that movie, Logan wakes up and it's back to Stewart, right?
Right.
At that point.
Yeah, because it's supposed to basically be, it ends and it's like...
Right, because like First Class is obviously like the Cold War or whatever. So that's like...
Yeah.
So
well, and then Days of Future Past is the 70s. And then Apocalypse is the 80s and Dark Phoenix is the 90s. But all of that is what I'm saying.
Not the Cold War. Okay.
Yeah. No, it is the Cold War. Like, yeah. Because it's the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s.
Yeah.
But I think it's
then he wakes up in like the 2020s or 2015 or something, right?
Right.
So it's back to Patrick Stewart. So that would be an old Patrick Stewart in this new Deadpool. Okay.
Although we have no idea what that means, because technically, I guess all of the events, and this is again talking about like how they're going to tell us who this Wolverine is or who this Beast is or any of these characters. Because technically, I think that Days of Future Past like erased parts of the original trilogy. Because like Logan wakes up and it's not only that Days of Future Past fixed the issue there.
Yeah, right.
It also intentionally fixed the Brett Ratner issues and brought Jean Grey back and brought Professor X back. And so, which I guess he had been brought back. It's a whole thing.
You're right. We're going to get into that somewhere else.
Yes.
We'll get into that somewhere else.
But I think that the bigger picture is, I think that makes sense, that they're slotting it in during that time period, which I think would line up pretty much with present day if they're kind of doing that. And that's fun. That's fun to me.
And then Kelsey Grammer would technically be Nicholas Hoult grown up. It's the same character. It's just played by a different person because it's 30 years different. Okay.
I think that's right.
Well, yeah, I am intrigued as far as, like I said, how they're going to bring X-Men to our universe, and now Monica's over there and trapped. And that did get me thinking about, well, how many different ways now do we know in the MCU that characters can travel realities? We've seen the TVA, and they can do it with their portals. We now, in this movie, have seen that the Bangles, 1 or 2, can create a rift large enough to go to another reality. And the only other time that I can think of right now is America Chavez, which we haven't heard from her in forever, but she can punch through realities, right?
Right.
She can travel.
True.
So I was kind of surprised, like, that she hasn't tied in at all. Maybe that's one way to get Monica back. Or go talk to Doctor Strange, and maybe he'd be like, well, I have this friend America who knows how to do this. But then maybe that's what starts the trouble, right? If you're doing it too much, and now it's getting complicated.
that would fit with the incursions definition that we got in Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, and I mean, one kind of final thing that I think is interesting is just that Maria, we saw that she existed as Captain Marvel in 838, I think was the Multiverse of Madness universe. So she also exists, if this is the original Fox universe, there are also other superheroes, which is not something that we ever saw in the X-Men movies. Like, it was always very clear that you either were like a mutant or you were a human without superpowers. You didn't have like Spider-Man around. Right. And so it'll be interesting to see what that means and how that universe has maybe evolved. Or watch it not be Kelsey Grammer, and this entire conversation didn't even matter. Yeah, well, and if that's the case, then I think that there's not a ton to really say that wasn't already covered in Multiverse of Madness anyway.
Well, and then there's that shot of Maria Rambeau, who in that universe is maybe Quasar or something. Like, right. I don't know that.
And she has both of the bands.
But in that X-Men universe, we never saw Quasar, right? That would be a new character, so they'd be saying...
Yeah, it would be... Well, we never even saw... Well, again, Dark Phoenix, I guess we saw space. And that's the only time we ever saw aliens or anything.
Yeah.
That's also a movie that I can't fully speak to because it's one of the few movies that I literally could not finish. So I
haven't seen it either. Crazy.
It's a tough one. So if we go back,
we'll have to watch it somewhere. Yeah.
But
you can
anyway,
pay us money on Friends from Work Plus to see us go through that torture.
There you go. Yeah, we need to create a whole new tier just for
$45 a month just for us to watch X-Men.
Dark Phoenix.
Okay. Look, I really enjoyed the movie. I said this earlier on, and I said this in my spoiler-free preview. I don't think that it does enough to redefine the genre to change someone's mind on the genre. So if you are a critic that already doesn't like superhero movies, there's no way that this one is now going to be the one to win you over, in my opinion. That's what I think is going to end up happening with some of the reviews. But I think if you do like superhero movies, it's really breezy and fun, and you'll really enjoy it, which is why I'm becoming so passionate about trying to frame our audience's mind, because this current cultural war on this stuff is becoming so draining. I don't care about what the perception is about these things from afar. I don't care. I don't care if critics are going to not like it. What I do care about, though, is that people who do care getting worn down like I had happen with The Last Jedi. And that's what I'm trying to prevent here in this podcast. So I thought it was really good. It's not the best movie they've ever made. I really enjoyed it. And I think if you like superhero movies and you go in with the right expectations, you'll have a really good time and you'll enjoy it. And it's not like a cheap, just popcorn movie. It's just fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had fun talking about it with you today too. So, I always get really tired by the end of these going over everything.
But I agree. And I think the way I look at it, and I'm curious to hear if people agree or disagree, but I said this to you earlier. I really think that if this movie had been released at any point in phase 2 or even phase 3, I think that it would have been received well, and I think people would have enjoyed it at least as much as the original Captain Marvel.
Good point.
I think it's a significantly better film. Yeah.
Correct.
And that, I think Captain Marvel had like 90% or something on Rotten Tomatoes, or at least high 80s.
If it came out in phase 2 before this divide, yes, this movie would land at 82% and 85% audience, and most people would like it and go, it's a fun entry, and that's what it would have been. Yep.
But as it stands, I would not be surprised if this lands somewhere south of final reference Thor: The Dark World, which it should not, clearly. But Thor: The Dark World still is fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, which is that is the perfect example. It's the same thing as Quantumania. If it ends up lower than that, honestly, even Eternals is a better movie than Thor: Dark World. It is.
Right.
It really is.
Right.
But Ant-Man's definitely a better movie than Thor: Dark World. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Like I said, there are so many ways to get connected. Hit us up anywhere. But if you do nothing else, just listening to this podcast and subscribing to it so that these episodes are easier for you to get is incredible and a huge way to support Robbie and I in the podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Stay around because we'll be talking about the Loki finale really, really soon, which is crazy, the end of our mega week, and then some really fun Spider-Man 2 type stuff coming up in the upcoming weeks, and rewatch stuff and all kinds of stuff we can get into. Thank you for listening. We'll see you right back here on Friends from Work.